Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us on episode 206 of Blowback, Exposing Imperial Decline. I am one of your co-hosts, Billy Bob. I'm on the West Coast. It's morning for me. It's 9 a.m. My other co-host is Ian Cummer, streaming live from his dacha in Crimea. It is 8 p.m.
7 p.m.
It's fun every time I get it wrong. So it's not morning for Ian. If you are in Central or West Coast time, it's morning. But we appreciate you joining us. We have a great topic, very important topic to discuss today. And we're going to use Ian's most recent article at his blog post, readingjunkie.com. He did a critique of this new film, very expensive film called the Odyssey. It's an old story going way back thousands of years, been retold every generation since. And we have Matt Damon this generation to play Odyssey. But so Ian has written a very long critique of the film, and unfortunately I have not seen the film, but I did read Ian's critique, and we're going to discuss that. And then we're going to get into the broader issue of propaganda and, what it does, what its uses are, etc. But Ian, do you want to kind of just present your article? And I can try and pull it up if you want.
I actually have it here, so I can do
great.
that for you. Let me see here. Share screen. Yes, that's what we want. Okay, guys, so this is the review of the Odyssey I wrote a couple days ago, and I called it, I said, the Odyssey is literally the worst movie ever made. Nice provocative title for you. Now, by the way, I did actually see it. I did, for legal purposes, I have to say that I paid for it. Absolutely, totally paid, bought a ticket and stuff. I did see it. So basically, it's one of those where it's like all of Nolan's movies. It had a very large marketing budget. It had a lot of this guerrilla marketing that they tried to do. That they stir the pot. Like they had the Ellen page or Elliot page is going by now. They kind of, without context, drop these little clues about the movie, and people make assumptions based on those clues. So for example, here they dropped that Ellen Page was going to be the movie, and then people assumed it was Achilles, and say, oh well, why is this transgender person playing Achilles? And of course there's all this outrage, and it turned out it was actually a different character. But yeah, so all that's happened. And now, when I saw the trailers, I'm going to stop sharing the screen because it's going to be problems. But I had some apprehension about it. And actually, the Ellen Page casting was one of the least of my concerns about it. I was actually more concerned about Matt Damon. Now, Matt Damon, of course, is a very famous actor. Big star power for the movie. But, I saw him in the trailer. I was like, well, why cast Matt Damon as Odysseus? If you gave me 100 guesses for a good actor for Matt Damon, I wouldn't have thought of Matt Damon. But I can see the reason they did that, because they're really trying to deconstruct or decolonize. Like that's a very I don't think they actually said decolonize here, but it's a very popular word. Oh, we're decolonizing this. We're deconstructing this. We're because there's all these themes. There's patriarchy. There's imperialism. There's whiteness. We're deconstructing whiteness. So in this case, They did all of that. So the movie itself is based on the most controversial translation of the Odyssey by Emily Wilson. I want to say her name is Emily Wilson, written in 2017. I haven't read the Odyssey for 25 years, but that's a relatively new translation. And the goal of that translation was to remove the patriarchy and you know the glory from the story, right? So it's really meant to deconstruct the character, which they do, you know. So he's present, and I can see why they picked Matt Damon. I mentioned that in the article. I can see why they chose Matt Damon for that role, because he's not Kirk Douglas or any of these other more traditional macho actors they pick for the role. Even if you read the descriptions of Odysseus and the Iliad and in the Odyssey, you know, they describe him with he like the broad shoulders, you know, it's very masculine. He's actually bigger than Agamemnon, right? So but so they really portray him as a more broken down, tired character. And if you watch this movie, essentially watch this movie scene by scene. It's very political. Like they're not just like they're kind of in a broad sense deconstructing. Or this is they're just deconstructing the whole story. So every scene is deconstructing it and subverting the story in a different way. So there's always this. They talk about there's the rape culture. There's the there's the sexism. So every scene has one of these culture war political themes that they push in it. And so this is the point I make in the article. It's interesting that the U.S. entertainment industry is more fixated on promoting propaganda than probably any other national or imperial media industry in history. Even Nazi Germany, like if you look up, Nazi Germany's film industry, the 1930s up to 1945, even they were comparatively much more focused on entertainment. Not every movie needed to have, a political message. You could just have light entertainment. It was allowed in Nazi Germany just to have light entertainment, a movie that's just to entertain people, or not about, the political messages that they want. So that's the meat and potatoes of what I said. There is a link in the story in the description of this video, which you guys can go and look at. And I'd be interested to hear Billy Bob's take on the story. So you mentioned you had not had a chance to. I mean, I'm sure you were thrilled, you were excited to watch this movie. You just hadn't had the time to go see it yet.
Yeah, I mean, I'll watch it. I mean, I'll probably wait for it to come out on Amazon for several months before they drop the price from either $30 or $20 to, I'll pay maybe $9 in a couple months, or 3 or 4 months. But yeah, no, I haven't seen it. The way that I kind of understand and contextualize what you're describing is just through class analysis. And then so when I think about class analysis, I think that we live in a society that is of, by, and for a tiny minority. The entire system is owned and operated of, by, and for a tiny minority of elite, wealthy, billionaire class. They own both political parties, they own the media, they own Hollywood. And so everything that is produced, everything that is offered for consumption is designed to obfuscate this fact of, minority rule, and to obfuscate the fact of oligarchy, and also to, divide, the majority against itself. So these are the most important, interests for the ownership class to pursue. And so they have to engage in propaganda. they have to constantly lie and conceal, the reality, and at the same time they have to divide the working class. So like this is just their prime directive. So the Odyssey. So so when we talk about division, when we talk about the oligarchy dividing the working class against itself, we understand that they divide themselves into two competing factions, right? Democrats, Republicans, liberals, conservatives. And then these factions go to war with each other in a very overt way. And this is what the media covers. This is what is always talked about, always ignoring, the fundamental reality that I just described that precedes this manufactured division, and effort to divide the working class. So that's how I process and perceive this film. It's obviously propaganda in service of the oligarchy for one faction of the one of the two factions that they divide themselves in. It's it's propaganda for the liberal wing of the faction, to be used in order to proliferate opinions and thoughts in those people that subscribe to their faction, or they're part of their faction, and it's part of a culture war. And so I can definitely see how the other side of the faction, conservatives, are going to identify, the subversive elements of this film, patriarchy, destroying the patriarchy. Whereas, conservatives think, I don't know. I mean, anyway, it's just, so conservatives aren't really in opposition to patriarchy, right? They're just like, hey, there's natural differences among the sexes, and, things just, so these are the two. I don't know. That's basically the context within which I see this film, and but I think what we should do is not focus on a particular faction's propaganda against the other ruling class faction. I think we should look at a big picture, and I think the big picture is that we have one oligarchy, and it has interests, and those interests are namely to conceal the fact that we have an oligarchy, and the other interest is to in so doing, in order to conceal that fact, you have to also divide the working class and get them going at each other's throats, on cultural issues, so they don't unite around class issues. And I mean, ultimately, Hollywood, of course, is mostly belongs to the liberal faction, and that's so true. There's not a lot of conservative, Republican, movie making, publishing houses or screen whatever, people who are actors, produce films, artists, like those people are by and large, going to be on the liberal faction. So Hollywood, it's not like it's 50-50, 50% of the films are Republican. And no, it's, Hollywood is definitely a battleground in the culture war that is on the side of liberals. But again, I think that, as a sensible person who's rationally looking at the totality, you have to understand the context within which that one film is being produced. We have to understand why it's being produced, what purpose it serves, and if we do that, we can understand that the vast majority of content created in our society, either Democrat or Republican, is done to do two things, right? And that's number one, to obfuscate and conceal the reality of oligarch class rule, and then secondly, to divide society, divide the working class along culture lines, so we do not unite along class lines. I had an image that I wanted to present that kind of, I think I presented it before, but let me do it again.
You find it, how about we catch up with the comments while you're... Oh, you found it.
No, it's too late. I'm already there.
It's too late. Got it.
So I don't even know who Wim Wenders is, but I saw this comment, and I think it has value, right? So it makes the argument that every film is political, and most political of all are those that pretend not to be not to be political. So entertainment movies, they are the most political films there are because they dismiss the possibility of change in every frame. They tell you everything is fine the way it is. They are a continual advertisement for things as they are. And so, one of the truths that I like to that didn't here. So one of the the main truths that I think need to be appreciated, understood, and that are largely ignored by the vast majority of people, is that there's an elephant in the room. That elephant is the concept of class. And our society has systematically removed the concept of class from people's minds. But in reality, this concept is so central to understanding everything and why things are the way they are. And yet, because the ruling class is interested in making sure people never appreciate this reality, that this concept is systematically removed from any kind of public discourse, whether it's the news, Hollywood, entertainment, music, because they own all of these platforms. They are able to, censor any sensible discussion about this all important and most useful concept of class. And again, they're very interested in doing this because, if people were appreciative of this reality, it would be, very threatening to their continued class rule, because, the people would say, this is bullshit. We need to replace, this capitalist oligarchy with a government that actually represents all the people, especially the working class. So that's my long-winded response, Ian. Where are we going to go from there?
Well, I'll respond to it, but why don't we catch up because we want
Okay.
people to know that we read what they say. And I want to get
I didn't even realize.
Yes, we have a bunch of comments. I just want to catch up so people see that we are reading what they say. Daryl says, great synopsis, Ian. About thrilled to see Western classics turn to slop. Ramisha, good morning. And Ramisha also agrees. Bob is right. Fascism in disguise of democracy. Information war. And now Daryl is made several comments here, so not a lot of Gentiles in Hollywood. So there was a point I made later in the article. And again, guys, links in the description. I was asking, and this is also kind of a responsibility of Bob Stitch, because I was asking, why make this movie now? So like Christopher Nolan, he is, he on the propaganda, serious, on the low end of the spectrum being entertainment, the high end of the spectrum being, very serious propaganda. Nolan's traditionally been on the lower end of that spectrum, right? So I don't really associate that. I mean, they do, of course, have that messaging, but this is earlier, like Tenet, Inception, the Batman movies. They don't really have. They're very different in tone from this. So we have to ask, why did Nolan decide, or someone ask him to make this movie now, and why now? What's going on now that they felt like they needed this deconstructed Odyssey? So there's any number of explanations for that, but one I floated in that article. Let me just find the paragraph, and I will just read it out. So okay, so in this particular movie, the propaganda points cannot possibly be made more blatant. The endless repetition of the law of hospitality to guests is an obvious argument for open borders, mass immigration to Western countries, further driven home by showing ancient Greece is more diverse than downtown LA. As I alluded to already, the strong, empowered female characters give lectures about patriarchy and rape culture. But the main purpose of Nolan's Odyssey is to attack the cornerstone of Western civilization, which he symbolizes with the Trojan horse burning in the last shot of the movie. Though Nolan is Catholic, his movie feels very Zionist coded. With the timing of everything happening in the world right now and Western popular support for Israel collapsing so fast it's almost in free fall, it's hard to believe the Odyssey isn't a Zionist propaganda initiative. Like it or not, European monotheism did not originate in Europe, but in the Middle East. And the argument you have to support Israel because Jesus was a Jewish rabbi is an argument you'll see again and again in internet threads debating the war with Iran. Though it was Christ's apostles and Paul, not Christ himself, who brought Christianity to Greece and Rome, and that's where Christianity became the basis of Western civilization. But Israel's propaganda still managed to make the so-called Judeo-Christian values into Western academic consensus, and there is a kernel of truth to it. But what the Judeo-Christian values can't touch is the pagan traditions of ancient Greece dating back 3,000 years to Homer's times. Those brutal people in a brutal reality and their ideas of virtue, glory, and justice that became the basis of all Western civilization. So if you have two, foundations of what European culture is in the modern era, you have one cornerstone being Greece, the philosophy and, what the social virtues and science and all that going back to Greece. And that's the pagan origins of Western culture, and the monotheistic being Christianity, and that's Semitic. That's the Middle East. So it's not us, it's not Europeans who came up with that. It was Semitic peoples in Palestine, which they're now calling Israel. I do agree with you to an extent that culture wars are divide and conquer strategy. I would say every time there is a propaganda narrative, that's not just a distraction. There is a purpose to it. Because if there's not a purpose to it, then they went besides dividing. Well, you can say anything to divide people, but there's a purpose to that specific point. So in this case, it's important to strip away people's cultural and historical awareness that Israel doesn't lay claim to, if that makes sense. So I feel like that has a lot to do with the timing of this movie. So I'd be interested to hear what you and the audience thinks of that idea.
What movies are going to do is they're going to deal with the current events, right? They're going to the timing always has to do with the current events. And so, I didn't watch the movie, but I saw that, you thought they were making overt references to immigration and the patriarchy, which of course are two hot button cultural issues that, distract from the greater point of we are ruled by a goddamn psychopathic pedophilic oligarchy that doesn't give a fuck about the working class and pursues the interests of themselves, and they are loyal to their class interests, and they use their control of this country, our economy, our military, to further their class interests to actually the detriment of this country, and other countries and humanity in general. So that is what they have to obfuscate. That is why they have to throw out all these other things, policy things, right? Culture wars. What should our policy be about immigration? Well, let's set up two poles and let's have the working class fight amongst themselves within these two poles. Open borders or closed borders. Okay, go fight. And then we'll produce content to exacerbate that fight and that conflict, and we'll manage it. And that'll keep them distracted and occupied, and they will never, figure out that they need to overthrow us because we don't give a fuck about them. So, this is the dynamic. And this is the, again, I didn't see the movie, but when those were the two issues you brought up. Now, also, you bring up Israel, and definitely I would agree. So if you are talking about Israel losing, support, I think a better way to understand that is that the empire needs these forward operating bases like Ukraine, like Israel, And so they need to, garner support. They need to produce support within the imperial core for these enterprises. And so they have to engage in propaganda. And when they see that, the propaganda is failing, they have to, ramp it up. They have to put in an effort, invest money, invest filming, films, all, whatever it is, stories, news stories, articles, to promote a particular thing, especially when they see that essential thing is losing ground in the sphere of public opinion. So they manage this. This is what they do. They manage their empire. They manage public perception. They monitor it very closely, and they act accordingly. When they see something start to not go well in the psyche of the imperial, the citizenry of the imperial core, they will engage in countermeasures. They will pour money into countermeasures, propaganda countermeasures. So this is what we have to keep in mind. But here's the thing: what I wanted to kind of do when we're talking about propaganda, I want to relate it to current events. And we just had some U.S. military deaths, and so Trump, of course. There was a 19-year-old young woman who was killed recently. Her name was Isabella Gomez, and she's got a very attractive picture behind, in her uniform, her battle dress uniform, in front of an American flag, which is what everybody does when they join the military. They get this photo taken, and it's just striking that Trump wanted to use that image for political propaganda purposes, right? So he declared that she was a great patriot who died to make sure that Iran could never get a nuclear bomb. And so so I wrote a post contradicting that narrative, and putting forth what I think is the actual truth, right? The actual reality about why she died. And I think the actual reasons for her death had nothing to do with trying to keep Iran from having a nuclear weapon, because I don't think there's any evidence that Iran is trying to get a nuclear weapon or ever has tried to get a nuclear weapon. No, that itself is a manufactured propaganda story in order to justify attacks and aggression against Iran in order to destroy Iran, because ultimately the West is seeking total global hegemony. And so they want their proxy, Israel, to be the regional hegemon, and they want to destroy other rivals to Israeli hegemony and really U.S. hegemony, Western hegemony, ruling class, Western oligarch ruling class hegemony, because ultimately that's who these nation states serve and are owned by, this class of people. But so I think the reality is that we're seeing an escalation. We are like a frog being boiled in water, and the heat in that water is slowly being turned up. And that's how they're preparing us for something, far, far worse to come. So you'll remember, Ian, with the Ukraine war, the special military operation, at one point, Biden said, we're never going to give Ukraine jets. That will be World War III. We're not going to do that. And there was a time when Obama said, we're not going to give them lethal weapons. We're only going to give them, communications. We're not going to give them lethal weapons. That'll mean war with Russia, right? And so we've seen a slowly incrementalized ramp up in, the West crossing its own red lines repeatedly, and people are just conditioned to it. It doesn't happen all at once. They're slowly turning up the heat. This is the same way with these deaths, these U.S. service deaths. So they're very happy to cross this threshold. They're very happy to announce service deaths, and they're going to use it to justify further aggression, further military deaths. And this is all heading in one direction, and that direction is more war, larger war, full-scale war, and more deaths of Americans. And they don't want us talking about why. They want to use their propaganda apparatus to convince us that the why relates to a threat posed by Iran. Hey, we're being defensive. The United States is being defensive. We are defending ourselves. We're defending humanity from the aggression of these crazed Muslim radicals who want to just destroy everyone. I mean, that's their narrative. And so, so we're in a propaganda war. The propaganda war is the primary battleground of the class war, and it's a battle of narratives. And there's competing narratives competing to properly explain what is going on and why. And that's within that context. You have two sides. You have what I would argue is the reality about the material reality of oppositional class interests and class rule and oligarchic dictatorship in the West, and how this class of people, the ownership class, uses their control of states to further their class interests to the detriment of the various countries that they control, including the United States. And they're more than happy to sacrifice Isabella Gomez. I hope her name was Gomez. Was her name Gomez? I think it was. I know her first name was Isabella. So, they're more than happy to sacrifice more and more people like that, because that's the working class. And so there's many, many things that can be said in addition. They're happy to sacrifice because they're not sacrificing themselves, and they're never going to be held accountable for the things that they are doing. They know they are in positions of impunity, and they know that they can enact these policies and start these wars that they will never suffer from, and they will never be held accountable for, in any real way that matters, And so I don't know. I just think that's the purpose of propaganda from their perspective. That's the purpose of most of the propaganda that we see in society, is to conceal the fact. And so we go back to my quote here. They want to conceal this fact, this obvious elephant in the room, this huge elephant in the room, that that it's a dictatorship of a billionaire oligarchy, and they are using our countries, our economies, and our militaries, and our working class, and they're sacrificing them for their own class interests on a global scale. And what is their class interest? It's total global hegemony. It's defeating Russia, Iran, and China. And even liberals, Ian, I watch YouTube all day long. I watch, Jeffrey Sachs. I watch John Mearsheimer. I watch Scott Ritter. And they're all in agreement. They're all saying the same thing. The U.S. is engaging on a global war against Iran, Russia, and China. Even fucking liberals can see this obvious thing that is only fully explained by class analysis and looking at why things are going on through the lens of class struggle. So Mearsheimer, I've been complaining about him. It's like he sees it, but he doesn't know why. He's like, I don't know why they're doing this. I'm like, John, they're doing this because they're a class and they have more loyalty to their class than they do to this fucking country. That's the reality, liberals. That's why what is happening is happening. So they can see it, they point it out, they observe it, and they pull their hair out saying, I don't know why. Well, it's fucking obvious. Okay, Ian, thank you. I got really unnecessarily angry last episode, and I feel guilty and bad.
I feel guilty. That's what gets the clicks and the views. It's good. In fact, if there's some furniture you don't particularly you miss too much, it's good. It might even be good to break some things just to get this clip. I'm just kidding. Don't do that. So yeah, I think in regards to the casualties, so the initial report was 2 killed in action and a 3rd missing in action, which I think they eventually upgraded to a killed in action. I'm not sure. I didn't follow the news on that, but the point is there were several killed, at least. That's just what they're admitting now. I think there is a problem. I mean, there is a problem because it's an all volunteer since I want to say 1970 when Nixon the draft was in 1973, something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
It was an all volunteer force. So it's really getting people hyped up on the propaganda narratives is very important. So I think that's why it's so important when they hype up these deaths. And and I did see your post that you referenced on Facebook. I did read that. I did read that post. I did see some angry comments saying, "Well, it's not political. You're making it political, Billy Bob. You can't make this political." it's so important for them to argue that it's not political. Well, because there's just not really much sensible reason to join the military. I mean, it's not because for one, it's not the 1990s. You could join the 1990s, get the education benefits, and you'd probably be fine. I mean, and Gulf War was like a few days.
Well,
It
that's
wasn't.
what I did. I joined in
Yeah.
the 90s and I got money for college. It paid for my career. My college degree got my career going. And I know you were in the Marines as well. So we've both served. I don't say I proudly served. I mean, I did it for a reason. And when I did it, I was young and I didn't have the political views I do now. I wouldn't advise anyone do that, especially because there's a much bigger chance that they're going to be dying now than they were when I joined in 1990, 1999.
So there was an uptick. There was an uptick in volunteers in their recruiting figures when after Trump took office, and they did. It was a big propaganda push. It was those woke Democrats ruining everything. Making the military woke. And there was an uptick, but it wasn't enough of an uptick. So they have a very serious problem, because to maintain the military as large as it is, they either have to seriously, and guys, I do see the comments. I'll catch up with the comments in a few minutes. I just want to not lose my train of thought. I did lose my train. Oh no! So they're either going to have to get the recruiting numbers up, or they're going to have to introduce a partial draft. And by partial draft, we don't mean draft literally everyone, but they do that lottery system where there's a chance they have to draft. There's several countries that do that, by the way, like Denmark does that. There might be a couple others that do something similar to that, where they have basically a hybrid force. They have volunteers, but what they can't make up in volunteers, they get through conscription. And that includes like specialist fields. So if they have a shortage of doctors or a shortage of whatever type of technician, they conscript whatever the gap was. So they're really trying to avoid that. I think also it's a much weaker, the USA is a much weaker project than it was 20 and especially 30 years ago. And it does have less prestige. Like it or not, it does have much less prestige now than it did before 2001. Regardless of what you think, what happened on September 11th, it was a big outpouring of international support after September 11th. But I think if September 11th happens now, unfortunately, most of the rest of the world would either not care or just say, well, you know what, they deserved it. They freaking deserved it. That's a lot. It's a very serious loss in national prestige, and it's a very serious loss in the public support for the regime narratives at home. So, like you were saying, you enlisted in the 1990s, and so it wasn't necessarily a lot of risk. But now, if you enlist now, I mean, it's very clear that it's likely that you're going to end up in a war somewhere, and it's going to be against someone like Iran or Russians or somebody or China or whoever. It's going to be against someone who has quite a bit of capability to shoot back. So it's not a police action like in Iraq. It's going to be a serious war. You have a fairly high chance of dying. I just think it's good. And so that's part of the reason they push these, this narrative on the casualties with Iran. Because you're right. I did read that post, and what you just said, you're absolutely right. They didn't die to defend our freedoms. They didn't die for democracy or to bring democracy to Iran. They died for our regional project in Israel. They died, the Iranians who died defending their country. They died defending their country. No American who dies in this war is defending his country or defending anything at all. I do want to, we have a bunch of new comments. I do want to catch up with them. So really quick, Brian asked, what might be the ramifications if another player just went ahead and gave nukes to Iran? Well, it'd be very serious ramifications, which is why I don't think it's going to happen. And I think what they don't mention in the media is that these reactor projects, which is why they're enriching uranium to begin with, is for their reactor project, which is it's a partnered program with Russia. And unlike, I know we treat nowadays in the Western political climate, we treat nuclear proliferation as a joke, right? So why don't we just give nukes to Ukraine so they can nuke Russia? Why don't we give nukes to, whoever, whichever country we like? And that is a major shift back from the 1990s, when the USA also took nuclear proliferation seriously. We didn't want any ex-Soviet state except Russia to even have nukes. I mean, we were all on board completely on the same sheet of music on that. But Russia, China, I think everyone else still takes it seriously. And I do think Iran's being told they can't have nukes. I just think it's not even an option. I'm sure that's even part of the agreements to have those reactors. I think geopolitically, it helps to have this kind of threat that they could and get weapons grade uranium within a few months. I think that's a nice threat to be able to have without directly saying it. It's just kind of an implied threat, but at the same time, I don't think there's any realistic chance of it happening. I mean, there's a reason they've been saying it for 47 or 50 years, however long they've been saying it. Iran's been a week away from developing nuclear weapons for 40 years. There's nothing's changed. I don't think there's anything that's changed that's going to allow them to have nukes. So I think it's the same.
Now, I don't think Iran will get hit with nuclear weapons. And I think the reason is because if anybody tries to hit Iran with nuclear weapons, I think then Iran would create a nuclear weapon and destroy Israel. And so I doubt Israel is suicidal. But, I never put it past them, because again, given the choices of losing in a game or overthrowing the game board and just wrecking the game board so you don't lose, basically burning it all down so you can rule over the ashes. Like, I don't put that past them. I mean, we're certainly a long way from that. So, I mean, eventually, if things are clear that the West is going to lose on all fronts, would they do something like, just destroy the Middle East? Like, I don't put it past them, but I think it would be a long way away. And I think it's just a truism. If Israel or the United States use nuclear weapons against Iran would retaliate. They would then create nukes and use them against Israel. And Israel's so small that they would not survive. So nukes will not destroy the nation state of Iran. Nukes will destroy the nation state of Israel. So Ian is in Crimea, and he's got internet issues. I hope he can quickly pop back in. It looks like he's back already, but it's just something we have to deal with. For obvious reasons, Crimea has some internet issues. Let's see. I saw some good comments that I wanted to address. I like this one here. I mean, this is my point, right? Those two soldiers were not killed by Iran. They were killed by the U.S. government and donor class propping them up. Never forget. Yeah, that's the most important takeaway. And, when we talk about patriotism and we talk about love for the country, it's just, those people that support the oligarchy, they support this class of pedophilic psychopaths that, own the media, own Hollywood, own both political parties. Like, those people are not working in the interest of the country or the vast majority of people in the country. So I argue, real patriotism, true patriotism demands that this oligarchy get overthrown and replaced by a government of, for, and by, the vast majority, the working class, and that it identifies and pursues our interests instead of, both domestically and abroad, only caring about pursuing the interests the class interest of the billionaires, and and then creating this elaborate propaganda apparatus to obfuscate that fact, because that's exactly what they're doing. But Ian, I'm glad you're back, and I didn't want to steal what you were saying.
No, thanks for holding the line until I came back. I just had an unstable connection there for a minute. I fixed it for now. But yeah, so what I was going to touch on is we've had several comments here from Daryl, from Amir. I think it's a true statement that, since we're talking about Israel, and to tie that in with the opening topic, with the Odyssey, it's more than just culture war. It's more than just the Epstein class. There is a Zionist project, right, which is ethno-nationalism. And in these WASPs and these Catholics and these other groups that aren't Jewish or Zion, but they're still Zionists, because of course you don't have to be a Jew to be a Zionist. Lindsey Graham, who is now in hell, I guess. He decided he took he lived just long enough to see the war lost against Iran and then died. I think if you ask these people, even privately or even read their minds, they're not supporting Israel because, it's a useful tool, or because it serves our class interests. Because they are Zionists, because they believe. Ted Cruz believes. What's his name? The ambassador to Israel. I'm drawing a blank on his name.
I know his daughter was the former press secretary.
Huckabee. Well, no, because I was thinking of Cuckabee. I call him Cuckabee so much I forgot his actual name for a minute. These guys are Zionists. They believe in the Israel project, and the Odyssey, and movies like that. It goes beyond that. We're pushing capitalist propaganda. We're making people lose class consciousness. It's more than the usual surface level culture war. There is a bigger motive. Yes, and thank you, Daryl Huckabee, or Rabbi Huckabee, as Defiance said. It's a great username, by the way, Defiance DPR, Donetsk People's Republic. But yeah, I'm sorry, Billy Bob, were you going to say?
Well, yeah, no, I mean, I was going to say, let's discuss that. I mean, I addressed that, and it's interesting that, I'm not sure what distinction you're trying to make. I mean, you're arguing that they're true believers, or you're arguing that it's their true belief that is driving our policy. But I would push back against that, and I would think, their beliefs are a result of the material interests of empire. And so I think, when I explained that, Israel is beneficial to the projection of force for the U.S. empire in that most important region of the world, that explains why even people who aren't Jewish support it. And that explains why people who even aren't Ukrainian, support Ukraine. And again, to call it supporting Ukraine, I would question that, right? They're not supporting Ukraine. They're using the people of Ukraine, as a proxy force to benefit the interests of empire. And I would argue the same thing is going on in Israel, right? They need Israel to be an ethnic Jewish state, sure, because, if they weren't an ethnic Jewish state, the U.S. wouldn't control them, right? They wouldn't be able to, because if they were a democratic state that represented half the population, just like it represented the other half, they wouldn't have these policies of genocide against their neighbors. So I mean, it's like, what is the driving factor? The driving factor is class interests, and it's not any individual's particular true belief in something. That is not the driving factor of our policy, of our imperialist policy. And so let's not get caught up in trying to figure out, does Huckabee really believe what he does? And is his true belief in Israel, is that why we have this policy? Like, I just don't think that's helpful or useful. And it's, again, it's Marxist materialism versus liberal idealism is how I would contextualize, how I would disparagingly contextualize that debate, So I agree. A lot of Zionists out there, and they're not just Jews. And why? Because Zionism is an ideology that benefits imperialism, just like Ukrainian nationalism benefits imperialism. And if those two ideologies, Zionism or Ukrainian nationalism, did not benefit imperialism, there would be no promotion of those ideologies within the imperial core.
Well, the issue with this, I mean, let's consider what I would call, just very traditional conservatives like Tucker Carlson, Majority Green, those guys who are now on the fringes. They're actually outliers. They're ostracized by their own party. And why are they ostracized by their own party?
Well, I would argue. Okay, go ahead.
Well, we had a show I actually consider one of the most important shows he did was the interview with Ted Cruz. And if you remember that show, Ted Cruz was basically initiated. He wanted to do an interview with Tucker Carlson, and it was a very it was kind of a sincere opening to that show where Tucker Carlson mentioned he grew up he emulated all of his father's values. He grew up as a Reaganite. They believed in this great conflict with the Soviet Union and Pax Americana, American ideas, and Reaganomics and all this stuff. And he just describes like, but now you go to Moscow, which was this terrible place, and it's a very nice capital city, but walking around Washington D.C., you go one block from the Capitol building, and there's homeless people, homeless Americans, and drug addicts, just on the streets. And he's asking Ted Cruz, how is this good? How is this good for the nation? How is this system benefiting Americans? And Ted Cruz was really representing the other side of this divide between these traditional conservatives and these new conservatives, these neoconservatives. And Ted Cruz he directly said, it wasn't even paraphrase, it's just a direct quote. He entered politics to help Israel. Exact quote. So I think it's not just imperial. You don't a traditional imperialist doesn't say, I'm going to join politics to help this completely different country that's not even a formal U.S. ally. There's something a bit more to it going on there.
Okay, can I try and address that as pointedly as possible? To me, you're kind of embracing this idea that gifted politicians just happen to be excellent politicians, and their political skill is what gets them to positions of power. But I would argue that that's a really fundamentally flawed concept to embrace. I would say that let's just assume Ted Cruz had completely opposite politics, right? Let's say he was just as gifted, just the perfect person, but his approach towards Israel was other than it is. Would he ever get within 1 million miles of any political office? Of course not. So it doesn't matter what Ted Cruz believes. This is what I'm saying. It doesn't matter what he thinks. It doesn't matter what he believes. What matters is what his positions are and what he does. And if his positions were different, he would never be within 1 million miles of power. This is the point. And so, it just doesn't matter what Ted Cruz tells Tucker Carlson about why he does what he does. The point is that what he does, again, is consistent with the consensus strategy of the empire. The consensus strategy for global domination of the empire is to use Israel as a forward operating base of the empire in this most strategic area of the world. The most resource rich, very important area of the world. And Israel is integral to that project, that imperialist project. And therefore, it's a threat to the interests of empire when public support for Israel starts to decline. That is a problem to be addressed with propaganda, flooding weapons, or to just say, hey, we don't give a fuck what the people want. We're an oligarchy, and we're going to keep supporting Israel regardless of what the people say. And that's more and more what they're openly doing, right? And again, they're revealing themselves for the reality of the oligarchy that they are, and they're no longer caring about pretending to be a representative democracy. So this is what happens when crisis develop. All the pretense goes out the fucking window, and the mask comes off, and we can see clearly exactly what is going on. So that's what's going on. We have an oligarchy. We have a consensus strategy for global domination that includes supporting Israel in the Middle East, because it's a very important area. So any dissent against that strategy, against that consensus strategy, is going to be censored. It's going to be put down and suppressed. And that's why we're seeing all these laws against, attacking Israel, against, telling opinions against Israel. And in many states, you can't get public funding if you, for instance, support BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanction of Israel. If you support that, you're not going to get any. You're not allowed in the state of Texas, for instance, to get any government funding for any project you want to do to benefit the community. So this is just how it works, and it has very little to do with people's individual, what they really believe, and again, Ted Cruz is he's a salesman selling himself to the oligarchy. He is saying, hey, oligarchy, I'm your guy. I'm going to further your interests. I'm going to be the go-between between these credulous dupes in my district that keep voting for me and your interests. I'm going to very efficiently, very effectively further your interests against the interests of these idiots that vote for me. That's his job. That's what he's telling them. And Tucker Carlson is not much different. Tucker Carlson represents a faction of the oligarchy that wants to, change up strategy. They want to do things a little bit different. But he doesn't oppose the oligarchy. He doesn't oppose the system of monopoly capitalism that produces oligarchy and which maintains oligarchy. So the only people that represent actual real change are socialists who are saying, instead of oligarchy as a government and instead of capitalism as the prevailing system where everything is going to be produced for private profit. No, we're going to have a sensible approach where the economy is geared not towards maximizing private profit for pedophilic billionaires, but it's actually going to be based on public need, poverty levels, access to healthcare, access to education, access to transportation. So, and we can look at China as a model, and we can do Chinese communism with American characteristics. Is the so China is the proof that socialism is infinitely superior to capitalism, and that government of, by, and for the working class is infinitely superior to government of, by, and for the oligarchs. So this is why China is being they want to isolate, encircle, and contain China. They want to destroy China because China they embody this fact of the superiority of working class rule and the economy being structured for public benefit and not private. And when I say private, I'm not talking about you and me. I'm not talking about the working class. I'm talking about private, the profit for the owners, the ownership class, the same ownership class that owns both. Anyway, you know what I'm saying, Ian. I feel like a broken record, but
well, I have these same debates with pro-Israeli conservatives, because they love that line that that Israel is the USA's unsinkable aircraft carrier, and I always ask them, an aircraft carrier against who? who is the USA's enemy in the Middle East? Saudi Arabia, an ally. Turkey, and a member is an ally and a member of NATO. Jordan is an ally. Syria was an ally, and actually is an ally. Back to it with Assad out. Even Iran was completely fine with being integrated into the, right now, as we speak, Iran's oil sales could be being routed through New York bank accounts, and they would be perfectly happy with that. It was the USA that said no to that, right? So, they say, well, if we, so the whole argument is that, they're attacking our enemies in the Middle East. Well, we wouldn't have any enemies in the Middle East to begin with if in 1967 we had not decided to pick up the towel where the Soviet Union had dropped it and support Israel. So it's just, I don't see a lot of substance to the idea that Israel is a means to an end rather than an end to itself, if that makes sense.
Let's take that situation and let's compare it with the situation in Ukraine, right? So so it's the same thing, right? Like Russia is willing to be a friend of the West, right? They're willing to route their oil money through Western banks, right?
Mm-hmm.
So is it the Ukrainian lobby that is all powerful in the West and forcing that conflict?
Well, with Russia, it's a similar question to Israel, actually. And in fact, I remember a Sullivan with James Sullivan, James Sullivan was talking to Tucker Carlson, and he was going on, but we have to stand with you. And this was in 2021, by the way. This was before the war. This is in 2021. He's telling Tucker about how we have to stand with Ukraine against Russian regret, blah, 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 blah. And Tucker just directly asked him, well, why is Ukraine our ally and not Russia? Logically, if you're an empire, you want to be allies with you want strong allies, right? So there's no reason to side with Ukraine against Russia rather than siding with Russia against Ukraine. And what was interesting, Sullivan had no answer to that because you can't logically argue that because there is not a logical explanation. Just like there's no logical explanation to support Israel. It goes a little bit deep in that.
Okay. So can I try? Can I try and respond to that?
Tell us about class loyalty, liberal framework, something like that.
Well, I mean, how I can articulate my response is that the reason that he didn't have a response to that question was because he doesn't want to talk openly about imperialism and what is really driving the policies, right? Like that's not a again, they create this whole propaganda apparatus to avoid talking about the real drivers of imperialism, right? They don't want to have that discussion in open. But what Iran and Russia have in common is that they have sovereignty, right? And it's that sovereignty that the United States wants to take away from them, and they can't, right? So that's the reason Iran is an enemy, because Iran is sovereign and Iran refuses to hand over their sovereignty to the United States. The same is true of Russia, right? So we wage proxy wars against both. But the idea that it's the little proxy itself that's getting us to do that and not our own imperial interests is fundamentally flawed. And that's what I'm trying to point out here. So, Ukraine is not driving our policy towards Russia. It is our imperialist interest. It is our desire to have total global domination and to destroy Russian sovereignty. That is what is pushing our use of Ukraine as a proxy. It is exactly the same thing that is pushing our use of Israel as a proxy against Iran. Iran is not going to hand over their sovereignty to the United States. They took their sovereignty back in 1979, and they are guarding it jealously and, militarily ever since. That is why we are using Israel as a proxy to attack them. I mean, it's very base, like there's no. I mean, I don't know why anybody would argue with that. Like, it just seems very obvious and basic. And so, these are the parallels between these two situations. And your argument is not consistent if you don't say the same thing about Ukraine that you're saying for Israel. No, Israel is wagging the U.S. tail. Well, did you have to say the same thing about Ukraine?
Well,
And neither one of those are true.
Israel is not taking in 5 million foreign immigrants from Pakistan in India. There aren't videos of Israel, and there's only women because all of the men have been killed. You don't see. I mean, so I don't know. I don't think Ukraine and Israel are comparable. I mean, let me ask you this. So it sounds like you don't think Israel is sovereign. Can you name one example of when Israel did something against its interests because they were not sovereign? Maybe I'm not phrasing that well, but when has Israel gone against their own interests in relationship to the USA?
So this is a liberal framework, right, that pretends that nation states serve the nation state interest. And I'm telling you, nations are comprised of classes. There's an ownership class and there's a working class. And so I would argue that the nation state of Israel has never pursued the interests of the working class majority. And they have always only pursued the interests of the oligarchy, and I would call it a Western oligarchy, because I don't see a distinction between U.S. oligarchs and European oligarchs and Israeli oligarchs. I consider Israel to be an appendage of the Western Empire, like they're part and parcel of the Western Empire, owned by Western capital, the Western capitalist class. And so, I don't think there's no utility in trying. You're not winning the argument by getting me to point out where Israel has never done something that is not in the interest of the Western capitalist class. I would agree. Israel does things that are in the interest of the Western capitalist class, and that's their function as a forward operating base to maintain global hegemony for the Western Empire. So, in that way, I don't understand, the utility of your question or what you think you're getting at. I just think you're missing the point. And
I mean, saying it's not. I mean, Israel is a socialist state. They have free healthcare. They have free higher education.
I mean, it's an apartheid state, right? Apartheid, based on one's.
Sure. Okay, sure.
Genocidal. They're a genocidal apartheid state. Like I don't know why we would call them socialists, but no, I get what you're saying, Ian. So let me just affirm. The Jews in Israel are beneficiaries of far more government programs than are United States citizens. I mean, that's absolutely true. I don't think that's socialism, but you're absolutely correct. But I'm saying, Israel is owned by the same billionaire class that owns the United States and owns Western Europe and owns Australia and owns Canada. Oh, Canada's part of North America, and owns, Japan and South Korea.
I mean, it's hard to, I mean, because the whole idea is, I mean, it seems like, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems the basis of your argument here is that Israel is a tool, like Ukraine. Okay, but that implies that, that implies that there's some sacrifice that Israel is making. If we can't name one, and now, so we did have some comments saying, several comments, giving examples. So one example, I'm trying to find the damn comment. Okay, so from Pittsburgh Dude, Israel's forced to pull back from the Suez Canal in 1956 by President Eisenhower. Israel was forced to pull back from Lebanon in the 80s by Reagan. So 1956, well, it was quite a while ago. And also Israel, the USA was not the main benefactor of Israel in 1956. in the 1980s. There were dead kids on TV. Reagan famously picked up the phone and told them to stop bombing Lebanon, and they stopped. And Reagan said, "I didn't even know I could do that." Well, you could do it because they received billions of dollars in funds from the USA every year. So Reagan had that implicit threat, I could stop funding you. Fair enough. The second example someone brought up was H.W. Bush, so Bush Sr., making them to do a peace deal with Palestine. Well, I mean, I guess. As Daryl pointed out here, I don't see Israeli troops dying for American wars. Not one Israeli soldier helped with Iraq. Even with the current war with Iran, they literally said we will not allow more U.S. planes to use our airports because Israeli citizens are going on their summer vacations and we don't want to spoil their holidays. And this was right after that casualty report. American troops dying in this war for Israel. And meanwhile, Israel's saying, "Well, we don't want to inconvenience our vacations to help you with this war." I just don't know how anyone can look at this relationship and say it's Israel serving the USA and not the reverse.
Well, again, I mean, do you think what is in Israel's best interest? Like, is it peace and prosperity with their neighbors? You're assuming their interest is just, greater Israel, right? But that's not really, I mean, I would argue that's not in their interest. Like, that's going to lead to permanent war and a siege state. I don't think that's the interest of Israel. So, I mean, again, greater Israel is something that will benefit U.S. imperialism because Israel is part of the empire. Israel is the forward operating base of Western imperialism in the Middle East. And so I think if Israel was going to pursue its actual national interest, it would make peace. It would probably agree to the 67 borders, which all of their neighbors have said, let's do this. But again, that is not conducive to Western global hegemony, right? So again, the problem is there's countries in that region that are sovereign that refuse to, relent and submit to the dictates of Western imperialism, and that's why they have to be attacked. And Israel and the Gulf monarchies are all, the forces that are going to be utilized by the empire to further the empire's global hegemonic interests. Now, you said Israelis aren't dying, and I would say they're not dying yet. And in 2014, not a lot of Ukrainians were dying, right? That happened later. But Israelis are dying. They were dying in Gaza. They're dying in Lebanon, and they're dying not to benefit the rational best interest of the state of Israel, which would be to have a not an apartheid state, but a democratic state. You even call it one country, incorporate the West Bank, incorporate Gaza. Give everybody universal human rights. Like, that is in the best interest of that state. And to the extent they're not doing that, you're proving my point, because they are not pursuing their national interests. They're pursuing the hegemonic interests of Western capital, which is the destruction of Iran, because Iran is sovereign and Iran refuses to, surrender. So, and again, it's a perfect mirror image is Ukraine and Russia. And I think the future does have more casualties for Israel on the horizon. We don't see them, we don't see 1 million casualties like we see Ukraine, but we definitely have seen casualties. And I think it's quite possible and likely that we will see increased casualties. But yeah, and again, and the fact that so I just don't think your response is a fatal blow to my framework or what I'm trying to explain to people. Like, it's
that might be the case. So we are 75 minutes in. How do we want to wrap this one up?
I mean, it's important for me to point out we're talking about propaganda, and I think the fundamental the fundamental reality why propaganda is so necessary and pervasive is the fundamental reality that if the reality of what is going on was widely known, people would unite against it. And because the fundamental reality of what is going on, would be widely opposed, and it would unite everyone against it, they are forced to maintain things as they are, to engage in colossal, cradle to grave, everywhere you look, propaganda, where they are censoring the reality of class, and they are offering a spitball's worth of explanatory narratives to justify their behavior. But ultimately, it is obvious that their behavior is not designed to benefit humanity or to benefit the majority of American people. It's engineered to benefit a tiny minority of elite wealthy psychopaths, and because they own everything, including the media, entertainment industry, education system, both political parties, the economy, they're able to censor and push forth all this nonsense, and create a culture war where the working class, instead of uniting against them, are just at each other's throats. So that is the fundamental purpose of propaganda. That is the fundamental necessity of propaganda from their perspective, and that's exactly what we see. And that is, for me, the most important thing that I want to articulate in this episode, Ian. So thank you for offering me the opportunity to do that. But as far as our show today, we should probably wrap it up. I was trying to get a guest. We are procrastinators. I waited till the last minute and was not able to secure a guest. But I thought this was a good conversation. I enjoyed it. And, we might reconvene on Thursday. But we always say that and then we don't. So, we kind of, we're missing a third of our wheel, which was Carlo Parcelli. May he rest in peace. And ever since his passing, we've it's been a little bit different. But yeah, no, I do appreciate you joining me and talking about issues. And when we have guests, I appreciate our guests, and I appreciate our viewers and our commenters. And I think it's just, we're in very important times, and we're discussing very important things that do not get any air, within the establishment press or on social media for the most part. And so I genuinely think we are engaged in important work, and I appreciate you joining me in that work, and all the viewers too. But anything else, Ian, you would like to say before we wrap it up?
I think it's a good no. I think it's a good note. It's a good end note. Thanks for the patience. I have been having some technical issues tonight, unfortunately. So thank you, everyone, for your patience. And we'll catch you on Thursday or Tuesday, depending.
Yes. Okay, guys. We will see you then. Hopefully sooner rather than later. But we'll talk about it after the show. Thank you, Ian. We'll see you later. Bye.